Hi, I'm Carlisle Hashim, and this is the Carlisle Hashim Show here at the Avalon Theater in Easton. And we are so proud, so happy to have Amy Abrams with us today. She is a writer, and she has 2 books coming out, one in June and one later this summer. Amy, your 2 books are quite different, aren't they?
Yes, one is a nonfiction book. It's a book about an artist. His name is Bill Schenck, and he lives out in Santa Fe. He's a pop artist. So the title of the book is Schenck in the 21st Century, The Myth of the Hero and the Truth of America. He's a pop artist, which means that he's taking icons and imagery of the West and appropriating them. So a lot of his images are cowboys and Indians. Probably the most famous pop artist that most people know is Andy Warhol. People would be familiar with his soup can series, for example, or his Brillo boxes. So what pop artists do is they take everyday items, like supermarket items or advertising images or even comic book illustrations, and they're saying this is art. So in essence, they're really questioning what is art, and throughout history, artists pose that question.
Well, Schenck is telling us what is art. He's telling us that the cowboy is art, isn't he?
Yes, he is. He's exploring the whole concept of the cowboy. So while Bill Schenck is celebrating the West by a lot of his imagery, he lives there and he loves the landscape, and his mastery of color is often used to underscore the beauty of the land. He's also poking fun at the myth of the cowboy, and he's questioning the 100-year PR campaign that we've given the cowboy through railroad promoters and radio serials and Wild West shows, country westerns, movies, Hollywood shoot-'em-up westerns, Pulp Fiction. We've made the cowboy the hero when really he was a lawless laborer. He always saved the day, he always got the girl. And so Billy's exploring this myth, and part of the book is about that.
So he lives, he was from Kansas and lives out on a ranch?
He grew up in the Midwest. He went to New York City to study art and to be in the center of the art scene. And that's where he actually met and played in the entourage of Andy Warhol. He was in the lighting crew of the band that Andy Warhol had. And so this was firsthand experience that he had as pop art emerged as an art movement. So he was inspired by that.
But Andy Warhol, he did not have stills necessarily that Schenck has or uses to create that feeling that he got when watching the cowboy movies.
Billy's work, a lot of it is inspired by cinematography. He loves the movies and he loves westerns. So he often uses stills of westerns as inspiration for his work. Those compositions usually have very high drama, and he's using those compositions to heighten the drama of his paintings.
So Billy asked you to write this book about him. That's quite an honor, isn't it?
I was happy to get the email. I wrote a few stories about Billy, and he was happy with those. I write for magazines and newspapers, both regional publications and national publications. Everything from Art and Antiques magazine to Art in America, the Wall Street Journal. I built a prominent career writing stories, and some of those were about Billy. He was excited about the way that I saw his work. And so he had been thinking about a book, a coffee table book, about the most recent part of his career, and that's why we called it Shank in the 21st Century. What was really, I really appreciate about the assignment to write the book was that he gave me free rein, no pun intended, and that was very nice, and he was very pleased with the book. So it was nice to have that kind of creative control.
So when you have that creative control and you're looking at an artist and you're saying, okay, this is his work at this point in time, how do you delve into that topic at this point in time versus where he was before, or where you think he might be going?
That's an interesting question. Certainly, the current work that somebody's producing very much relates to the context, who they are, how they grew up, what their early work was, what inspires them, where they happen to be living, what they're going through at the time. All of it, it's multifactorial. It determines where they are at that moment and why they're saying what they're saying. So it's part of what I really love about what I do, is that it's required that I delve in. And it's been a thrill to go into the studios of some very prominent artists and have them relate to me their mode of creative self-expression and learn about their passion. It's been instructive and exciting, and it's part of why I love what I do.
Well, let's segue into Ed Fischel, and he, as an artist, allowed you to come into his Sag Harbor.
Eric Fischel?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Eric Fischel.
Sure, Eric Fischel.
Allowed you to come into his Sag Harbor studio and learn not only about his work, but about him as that bad boy.
Okay, we talk about Eric Fischel. That was a fun story to do. Just recently, I wrote a story for Art in America about Eric Fischel, who is, I would say, reputed to be one of the most influential figurative painters of our time. You had mentioned, he lives in Sag Harbor. He has a beautiful home and studio there, and it was fun to drive down there and sit down with Eric. He's an arts insider, and he's been doing this for decades, and he's a great storyteller, and it was just great fun to hear his story and see what he's producing.
But going even further into that, when Eric was doing his work, you brought out in your article about his metamorphosis, you know, how he's emoting on the one side, maybe feeling a sadness, and then on the other side, integrating that into his work so that, okay, that's where I am now.
Sure. Eric is very forthcoming that painting is an emotional process for him. I think many people create out of a need to find out what's happening inside of themselves. So Eric grew up in Long Island in what you might define as a highly dysfunctional family. He's really come through, but his mother was a severe alcoholic. He grew up in Port Washington. It's just funny because it was 2 towns over from where I grew up in Great Neck, so we had that little bond. And he, I think, has been processing that pain of his childhood through his art. It's sort of, you know, it's the joke that the artist suffers and, you know, then they emote, but there's truth in the humor. And what's interesting specifically about his process in working through his childhood issues is that he will begin with characters that relate to the primary family figures and begin in a place of regret or anger. And as he's painting, he develops compassion for these characters in the narrative of his paintings, and many of his paintings are narratives. So there are many beautiful things about art, but that's certainly one of them.
And that word narrative just leaps out at me.
Okay.
Because when you talk about narrative, you are creating a narrative of the artist and his or her work. But wouldn't it be fun if you had the pictures and you could have the narrative underneath? Like, this is what I was feeling when I started on day 1, and this is how I'm feeling on day 45 or whatever, however long that may take.
Sure. I mean, that's in part what I might do in the text of a story or in a book. I think that people, readers or viewers, are interested in people. And the art is in some ways the messenger for the how people evolve. I think people are looking for clues about that evolution process to apply to their own life. I think in some ways that's one of the goals of art.
Yoko Ono, you had an interview with her after John Lennon died, and many people don't know that he was an artist in a different fashion than we know him as the musician.
Yes, I indeed was surprised to learn that John attended art school before he decided to take music as his primary means of creative self-expression. And Yoko Ono, his wife, felt that she wanted to share some of these beautiful pieces that he drew and painted with the public. And so several shows took place across the country, enabling me to have the opportunity to interview her about his work and her life with him. And she's so wholeheartedly devoted to peace and to making the world a better place. It's very authentic. She's a very lovely woman, and it was a thrill to hear some anecdotes and anecdotal stories about their life together. One of the things that was most poignant was that when he was killed, when he was murdered, I think we all can remember where we were when that happened, as that often is with these heroes that we have who have a violent end. And she relates that it was very hard. It was hard to process her own personal loss, because it was the loss that the world experienced, and it was very complex in that way. Usually it's a very personal thing when one's husband dies, but it was so much bigger than that, and it was interesting to hear her thoughts on that. She's an artist also, and they actually met in an art gallery.
Cool. Speaking of art galleries, right down the street there is going to be an exhibit of James Turrell. And you know James, and could you tell us about his art?
Oh, I'd be happy to tell you about James and his art. I'm a big fan. We're very lucky here on the Eastern Shore to have James Turrell as a resident. He has a home in Oxford. He has homes in other areas of the country. But and a show will take place April through July, James Turrell Perspectives. James is probably one of the most famous artists in the world right now. Surprisingly, many people aren't aware of that, who kind of lives right around the corner. He's a very humble man. So currently, this show is going up at the Academy Art Museum, but there are also 3 major retrospectives all being launched. One is at LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which is a 33,000 square foot retrospective, taking over almost the whole museum. as well as the Guggenheim in New York, and the Museum of Fine Art in Houston. So this is like unprecedented, really, and it underscores how important an artist he is. He works with light. So this is kind of an interesting concept to grasp. People think of artists with paint or with clay, but James, the medium is light itself. The work isn't about light, like Caravaggio or Vermeer or Rothko might be about light. And he has installations. They're really quite large. It's in part why we need so much space. We need 4 museums, as well as the Pace Gallery in New York has a show. So I would urge anyone to get a sense of James and his work by visiting the Academy Art Museum, which also has an exhibition that illustrates James' magnum opus, his 30-year ongoing project, which is the Rodin Crater Project in northern Arizona, which I had the great fortune to go see, even though it's not complete. And that is a extinct volcanic crater made into a celestial observatory. Just a tiny little thing going on in Arizona. And it is anticipated to be the largest artwork in the world.
It's awesome.
When it is complete. So anyone who's listening can't go there. It's not open to the public, and we all hope and pray that it will soon be ready. It's a matter of funding. It's beyond exciting.
Let's talk about your opus and The Cage and the Key that's coming out soon.
Okay, I have a book coming out in May. It's a novel called The Cage and the Key, and it primarily takes place in New York City. The protagonist, Celia, is in art school, and she has a lurid affair with her painting professor, which gets her to think that the choices she's making in the man department are kind of nothing but trouble when this thing eventually busts up, or inevitably. Celia goes on a spiritual sojourn. She goes west to New Mexico and to Arizona to uncover the sources of her foolish choices, and there she meets a very odd but endearing cast of characters: Native American shamans, all kinds of healers, soul retrievers, psychics who teach her about animal totems and guided meditation and sacred sites. And it's a fascinating journey that the reader takes with her through these healers. And as she progresses forward toward happily ever after, some saboteurs from her past threaten to topple her, as does the big bad business world. And so I'm intending that her narrative is an inspiration for women as they pursue happiness in work and in life. I think women are looking for something more, and in some ways I've used a novel, a fast and fun-paced novel. Oh, I'd love to read this. A sort of fast-paced novel as an entertaining way to give a guide to women who were seeking female empowerment. That was what I decided to do. So, and I appreciate you asking me to bring this along. This is the prologue. This is the introduction to the novel. It's 2 short paragraphs, and I'm very happy to read it. The story opens in the celestial planes before it takes place here on planet Earth. She nods to the council, and understanding is acknowledged by all that she has agreed she will undertake the assignment without knowledge of her skills, without access to her power. Placing her palms together in prayer above her head, her silhouette a mountain crest against the full moon, she descends down, liquid silver magic elixir, changing shape. Amidst a dream, her identity is erased, yet even upon awakening, she will not remember. To gain awareness of this sacred covenant, she will wait 50 years. Moreover, during this half-century, the pact entails that everything she will come to possess will be lost. This is the key to uncovering herself. This is the key to recovering herself. She alights on earth, inhabiting the bodily form of Celia Ann Barons to grasp this greatest of paradoxes.
So when you, as a writer, take on an assignment to write about an artist, is there a sense of losing yourself in that process to bring about the story?
That's a great question. And it's a complex answer, and I'm going to narrow it down. So when I'm writing nonfiction, there are many components that obviously have to be true. I'm writing truth. And while I do get inspired by the artist's work, and I do sometimes go into a zone where intuitively I understand something and then can relate that to the reader, it's really in my fiction where if I'm lucky, and all writers I think feel this way, all fiction writers who are trying to dive into their imagination, if I can surrender to that place, if I'm lucky, something comes through and all of a sudden I'm hearing the dialogue and kind of taking it down by dictation, or a character walks on and says something and I'm almost letting it come through me.
Well, Amy, we have delved down and we have heard your voice, and something came up, and it was very inspiring, and we appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Carlisle. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. I want to thank Amy for joining us today. Amy Abrams came to the Avalon Theater to join us in talking about her work as a writer, as an editor, and as a journalist. So Amy, if you would just share with us your upcoming books and the website that people can go to and find out more about them.
Oh, I'd be happy to do that. I'm coming out with 2 books in the spring. One is The Cage and the Key, and I'm working on that website now. It should be up and running in about 3 weeks, and probably around May 1st. So that is thecageandthekey.com. Currently, you can find all of my information on my personal website, which is amyabramswrite.com. So that's AMYABRAMS Write, WRITE.com. I will be having a book signing right here on the Eastern Shore in Easton at the News Center on Saturday, June 16th, which is the day before Father's Day. So go in and get all your cards for Daddy or your husband and come by and say hi to me there. I'd love to say hi to everybody and introduce myself to you. I have a story coming out in the Shore Life magazine all about the work of James Turrell.
Oh, cool.
And that will be the June-July issue of the Shore Life, which you can get on newsstands. And it's an overview of his career and also underscores his Rodin Crater project, which we talked about and I think would be of interest to people. Of course, as we mentioned, there's the Academy Art Museum show to see.
What's really nice about having Amy here, and you're going to her website and reading her books, is that she brings the East Coast to the, I don't want to say necessarily West Coast, but Midwest, and then brings the Midwest back here because of writing about Billy Shank and his work, and then bringing the East Coast here. She's now living on the Eastern Shore, but has lived out west and in New York. So we're really thrilled to have you.
Oh, well, I'm very happy to be on the shore. I feel this is a magical place, and it's a great place for a writer to be, and I'm very happy here.
Great. We're looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thanks.